Welcome to Whispers of the Past, where forgotten tales return to life. Emily sat quietly at the Denver Greyhound bus station, her suitcase resting against her legs, as if it were the only thing anchoring her in that noisy, transient space. The overhead lights cast a sterile glow on the scuffed tile floor, and voices echoed in fragments. Announcements of arriving buses, hurried conversations, laughter, the cries of a child resisting a mother's grip. None of it mattered to Emily. All her focus had been fixed on the arrival gate for 3 endless days. She had taken this trip with so much faith, her heart full of anticipation that Mark, the man who had promised her a new beginning, would be waiting. He had called it fate that they found each other online months ago, 2 dreamers searching for something more than the dull rhythm of small-town life. She believed him when he said Denver was where their love story would begin, when he described their future as if it had already been written. But 3 days had gone by. The buses came and left, each time carrying passengers into the arms of waiting friends and loved ones. Emily had watched so many reunions. Husbands wrapping wives into their arms, mothers kneeling to hug children who sprinted toward them, young couples clutching each other with relief. Every time, her chest tightened with hope, certain that the next man stepping off would be Mark. Each time she was wrong, the hope frayed further. She had slept on a stiff bench the first night, clutching her coat around her shoulders when the station grew colder after midnight. The second night, an elderly woman offered her a cup of tea from a thermos, and they spoke briefly, the woman assuming Emily was waiting for a delayed bus. Emily smiled and nodded but did not confess the truth, that she was waiting for a man who might never come. Her phone battery had died the day before, and she didn't bother to find a charger. The last time she tried calling, Mark hadn't answered. She had sent 3 messages, each one more desperate than the last, and his silence had been louder than the chatter of the station. She told herself he must be busy, that maybe he had car trouble, that maybe he had been delayed by work. But the truth, the ugly truth, gnawed at her heart. Perhaps he had changed his mind. She replayed their conversations in her head, every promise, every tender word. He had told her she was the one, that he wanted to build a life together, that the distance between them was temporary. Emily clung to those memories like a drowning woman clings to driftwood, even as the waters of doubt threatened to pull her under. By the afternoon of the 3rd day, she had grown hollow-eyed from exhaustion. Her coffee sat cold in a styrofoam cup beside her. She stared blankly at the clock above the information desk, each tick of the second hand reminding her how long she had waited. 3 days was not just an inconvenience. It was a declaration. If he had wanted to be there, he would have been. Her body ached from sitting, her spirit sagged from hoping. But still, some part of her remained glued to that bench, unable to let go of the fantasy she had woven around him. If she left, if she admitted defeat, it would mean she had been foolish, naive, and she didn't know if she could bear that humiliation. The station, indifferent to her heartbreak, carried on with its rhythm. A janitor pushed a mop across the floor, humming a country song under his breath. 2 teenagers leaned against a vending machine, laughing too loudly as they shared a bag of chips. A young mother rocked a baby in her arms while whispering a lullaby. Life spun around Emily, vibrant and insistent, while she sat frozen in her private grief. She wondered if anyone else could see the ache in her eyes, or if she simply blended into the faceless crowd of travelers. She felt invisible, and perhaps that was worse than being abandoned. It was just past dusk when Emily noticed a boy watching her from across the lobby. He couldn't have been more than 7, dressed in a plaid shirt tucked into jeans, small brown boots tapping against the floor as he shifted his weight. His hair was neatly combed, but his curiosity made him bold, his gaze steady on her. At first, she tried to ignore it, assuming he was simply a restless child passing the time while his father bought tickets. But when she glanced back, he was still looking, his head tilted as though trying to puzzle out her sadness. The boy tugged on the coat of the man beside him, a tall, broad-shouldered figure in a faded flannel jacket. The man, clearly his father, looked down and placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder before focusing on the counter where tickets were being printed. But the boy's attention never wavered from Emily. His boots tapped faster, his expression growing more determined, until suddenly he let go of his father's coat and strode across the lobby. Emily blinked in surprise as the little boots clattered against the tile, the sound sharp against the hum of the station. She sat up straighter, unsure of what to expect. The boy stopped in front of her bench, his small fists planted on his hips, his wide eyes filled with an innocence that could disarm even the weariest heart. "You look lonely," he declared, his voice confident, untouched by hesitation. Then, with a tilt of his head and a seriousness beyond his years, he asked, "Will you marry my daddy instead?" Emily's breath caught, a startled laugh tumbling out of her before she could stop it. For the first time in 3 days, her chest felt lighter, as if his words had cracked the weight pressing against it. She glanced at the father, who had hurried over, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Ethan," the man muttered, crouching to gently grip his son's shoulder. "That's not something you can just say to strangers." He looked up at Emily with an apologetic smile, his blue eyes soft despite the awkwardness. "I'm so sorry, ma'am." He tends to say whatever comes into his head. Emily shook her head, still smiling faintly. "It's okay," she replied, her voice warmer than it had been in days. "He just caught me off guard." The man extended a hand, rough and calloused from work. "I'm Daniel. This little cowboy is Ethan." She hesitated a moment before shaking his hand, feeling the firmness of his grip, the groundedness that radiated from him. It was such a stark contrast to the absence she had endured for days. Looking at the boy again, she said softly, "Well, Ethan, that's quite the proposal." Ethan grinned, unbothered by his father's scolding. "You looked sad. Daddy makes people smile, so I thought maybe you needed him too." Emily's laughter came easier this time, a sound she had almost forgotten she could make. Something inside her stirred, fragile yet undeniable, a reminder that life still held moments of light, even in the shadows of disappointment. As she sat there, staring at the man and his bold little son, she realized she was standing at the edge of something unexpected, something unplanned, something that might change everything. She looked once more toward the doors, the ones she had been watching for 3 days, and then back at Daniel and Ethan. The doors remained empty, and for the first time, she didn't feel the need to keep waiting. Emily didn't know how long she sat there after the boy's innocent question, but something had shifted inside her. The heaviness of waiting had begun to dissolve, like a fog finally lifting from the mountains. For 3 days she had been consumed by silence, defined by someone else's absence. Yet now, with this boy in boots and his father standing before her, she felt noticed, as if the universe itself had nudged her gently and said, "You are not forgotten." Daniel looked down at his son, who had taken it upon himself to sit beside Emily on the bench, swinging his legs and grinning with the carefree joy of a child. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, clearly embarrassed but also amused. "I don't know where he gets this boldness from," he said, his voice low and warm. Emily smiled faintly, shaking her head. "Don't apologize. He's honest. It's refreshing." Ethan turned to her, eyes wide with curiosity. "Why were you sad? Did somebody make you cry?" The question pierced deeper than she expected, but Emily steadied herself. "I was waiting for someone," she said softly, her gaze fixed on the station doors once more. "But I think maybe they're not coming." The boy nodded with the seriousness only children could manage. "Then it's good we found you. Daddy says sometimes people who don't show up weren't supposed to anyway." Daniel raised his eyebrows at that, then looked at Emily as if to say, "Don't take parenting wisdom too seriously from a 7-year-old. But Emily only felt her throat tighten. She had been waiting for someone to validate her hurt, and here was a child who had unknowingly done it with a simple truth. The evening crowd thinned as buses departed, leaving the station quieter. Daniel motioned for Ethan to stand. "We should let the lady rest. She's probably tired." But Emily found herself speaking before she could stop. "Would you sit with me? Just for a little while?" Daniel studied her for a moment, then nodded. They sat, the 3 of them, on the worn bench, strangers bound by chance. Conversation began slowly, with small questions and polite answers. Emily learned that Daniel worked construction in a town just outside Denver. He had been raising Ethan alone since his wife passed away 4 years earlier. Life hadn't been easy, but he spoke of it with a steady calm, as though he had built his world around resilience. Emily told him bits about Kansas, about leaving everything behind for a man she thought she could trust. She didn't say Mark's name, but the weight of his absence lingered between every word. As hours passed, the tension she carried began to loosen. Ethan leaned against her shoulder, fighting sleep but refusing to give in. When his small breaths finally steadied, Daniel gently lifted him into his arms. "We should go," he said. "But if you're still here tomorrow, maybe we'll see you again." Emily nodded, though she wasn't sure what she wanted. Watching them leave, she felt both lighter and lonelier. For the first time in days, she considered gathering her things and leaving the station. There was no reason to stay, except that a small boy had made her laugh, and his father's quiet strength lingered in her mind. The next morning, Emily awoke to sunlight pouring through the tall station windows. She hadn't realized she had dozed off. Her suitcase was still at her feet, her body stiff from the bench. She rubbed her eyes and told herself it was time to decide. Return to Kansas or carve a new path entirely. Before she could make that choice, she heard boots tapping against the floor. Looking up, she saw Ethan bounding toward her, his grin wide, his energy renewed. Behind him, Daniel carried 2 cups of coffee. "Morning," he greeted, handing one to her. "Figured you might need this." Emily accepted it, her fingers brushing his. The warmth seeped into her palms, and she whispered, "Thank you." They sat again, and this time the conversation unfolded more freely. Emily found herself telling Daniel things she hadn't admitted to anyone, how she had believed in promises that were never real, how she had feared being alone, how waiting at this station had become a strange prison of her own making. Daniel listened quietly, never interrupting, his gaze steady but gentle. He didn't try to fix her pain with empty words. Instead, he simply let her speak, and in that silence, she felt heard. Daniel, in turn, shared his own struggles. He spoke of long days balancing work and fatherhood, of nights when Ethan asked questions about his mother that he didn't know how to answer. "Some days," he confessed, "I feel like I'm building walls just to keep us safe, but I worry those same walls keep us closed off from everything else." Emily understood. She too had built walls, only hers had been made of hope misplaced in someone unreliable. Yet here, beside Daniel and Ethan, those walls felt weaker, ready to be broken down. Over the next 2 days, their paths kept crossing. Ethan insisted on sitting with Emily, telling her stories about school, about how he wanted to be a cowboy when he grew up. Daniel teased his son, his laughter deep and contagious. Emily found herself laughing too, more than she had in months. The station no longer felt like a place of abandonment, but strangely, like the beginning of something. One evening, as the sun set in streaks of orange and gold through the glass windows, Emily realized she had stopped glancing at the doors. The thought startled her. For so long she had lived in expectation of Mark's arrival, measuring her worth by his presence. But now she understood he was never coming, and maybe that was for the best. On the 3rd evening together, Daniel asked the question she had been avoiding. "What are you going to do, Emily? You can't stay in this station forever." She looked at him, her chest tight. "I don't know," she admitted. "I left Kansas for something I thought was real. Now I'm here with nothing but a suitcase and no plan." Daniel hesitated, then said, "Sometimes no plan is the best place to start. It means you can choose without being tied to someone else's mistakes." His words stayed with her long after. That night, as she lay awake, she realized she had a choice she hadn't allowed herself before. She could go back to Kansas, ashamed and defeated, or she could step into something new, not because of Mark, not even because of Daniel, but because she deserved it. The next morning, she found Daniel and Ethan near the ticket counter. Ethan ran to her, holding a small toy horse he wanted to show her. Daniel smiled when he saw her but searched her face carefully. "You look different today," he said softly. "I feel different," she admitted. She took a deep breath. "I'm not waiting anymore." Daniel nodded, understanding more than she said. "Good. You shouldn't have to." There was a pause. Then Emily asked, almost shyly, Would it be strange if I said, "I'd like to see you again, outside this station"? Daniel's expression softened, a mix of relief and something unspoken. It wouldn't be strange at all. Ethan clapped his hands, oblivious to the deeper meaning, and exclaimed, "See, Daddy, I told you she should marry you." They all laughed, the kind of laughter that came not from humor alone, but from a release of everything heavy that had weighed them down. For Emily, it was the first sound of true freedom. Days later, Emily stood outside the station with Daniel and Ethan, her suitcase no longer a symbol of waiting, but of moving forward. She didn't know exactly where the road would lead, but she knew one thing: she wasn't abandoned, and she wasn't invisible. She had been found in the most unlikely place, by a child who believed she deserved joy, and by a man who quietly showed her that trust could be rebuilt. The station faded behind them as they walked together into the crisp Denver air, 3 lives unexpectedly woven together. Emily had arrived believing her story was ending. Instead, it had only just begun.